The clock is winding down, and we're in a high-stakes escape mode, scrambling to make it out of Chicago and back to the Unseelie court before the fragile political truce breaks. If you haven't watched part 1 of this epic Fae romance and seen how Sienna went from cashier to crowned ruler, please check out the link in the description below. Chapter 5. The Fae Interrogation. The massive steel vault door, a monument of mortal paranoia and iron, stood sealed, its ancient tumblers finally quiet. The space beyond, a sprawling, subterranean chamber of raw concrete and metal, was now their world. Corvin had claimed a position near the vault, standing like a dark sentinel, while Sienna and Jax spoke in low tones, discussing the places they knew and visited in the now-shattered city. Sienna lay on the couch, wrapped in the thermal blanket, but the cold she felt had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the cold of depletion, the raw vacuum where her human vitality had been, now replaced by the unsettling, icy thrum of latent Fae power. She felt disconnected, yet intensely sensitive. Her newly elongated ears, thin and delicate beneath her fiery red hair, picked up every shift in Corvin's heavy coat, every scrape of Jax's boot against the dusty floor. Corvin was done patrolling again. He stalked into the small room, his movement filling the space with the dense, potent aroma of cinnamon and midnight mint. He didn't sit. Nothing about the human sat right with him. He stopped directly in front of Jax, his shadow engulfing the younger man, his handsome, brutal face a mask of absolute suspicion. The Seelie trap in the tunnels, Corvin began, his voice low and dangerous, forcing Jax's gaze up. It was precise, too precise for a general hunting pattern. They knew the weakness of the tunnels, the exact angle where the iron was thinnest, allowing the frost glamour to settle. This knowledge is not incidental. It speaks of a non-Fae asset who knows the veins of this city. It speaks of a collaborator. Jax kept his gaze steady, meeting the storm clouds of the High Lord's eyes without flinching. I told you, Lord Corvin. I know the utility grid. I worked in the Transit Authority. I know where the iron is thickest, and therefore, where it is thinnest. That's not exclusive knowledge. Many people work in the Transit Authority. But yet only you found us, Corvin scoffed, the sound harsh and challenging. He knelt slowly, bringing his eyes level with Jax's, the immense presence of the Fae Lord and overwhelming pressure. Normal humans do not risk their lives to lead Fae war criminals to safety. You risked your life 3 times to lead us to the tracks, to fight the scavengers, and to guide us here. This devotion is not born of civic duty, mortal. It is born of either unwavering loyalty or deep-seated treachery. Corvin reached out, and his cold fingers gently snagged the strap of Jax's gym bag, which the human had kept stubbornly close. Jax instantly tensed, pulling the bag tighter. You cling to this as if it contains your mortal soul, Corvin observed, his voice dripping with menace. What secret do you guard so fiercely, mortal? Is it the price of your betrayal? It's just supplies, Jax insisted, his voice tight, beads of sweat breaking out on his brow despite the vault's freezing temperature. Tools, food. Sienna felt a sudden, sharp lurch in the resonance, a flicker of warning that wasn't hers. It was Corvin's instinct, a cold, focused intent to kill. The danger was imminent. She forced herself to sit up, tossing the thermal blanket aside. The action drew Corvin's eye momentarily, distracting his focus. Corvin, wait, Sienna commanded, her voice surprisingly steady, the subtle Fae coldness in her tone lending her new authority. If he were an agent of Valen, he would have delivered us to the Seelie at the tunnel. He would not have shown us the way out. Corvin's hand hesitated, his gaze briefly flicking to Sienna. The new dominance in her voice, a consequence of the mating draw, gave him pause. His massive body blocked her view of Jax's bag, but her hyper-attuned sight was already working beyond the physical veil. Her eyes focused not on the bag, but on a loose, frayed thread where the zipper met the fabric. She saw a faint, dark smudge on the thread, a smudge of dried ink. Not supplies. Sienna used the temporary distraction to shift her weight, her foot deliberately catching the corner of Jax's bag and nudging it forward. The bag shifted, and Corvin's cold, powerful hand immediately clamped down, ripping the zipper open. Supplies tumbled out, canned food, batteries, and then, resting at the bottom, protected by a layer of clothing, was an object of stark, ancient power. It was a book. Not a modern book, but a volume bound in thick, scarred leather, darkened with age and covered in strange, silver thread markings that seemed to absorb the light. It smelled of old paper, dried herbs, and something ancient and sacred. Corvin's breath hitched, the only sign of surprise he ever gave. He snatched the book, his fingers tearing the thread holding it together. He flipped the cover, revealing pages filled not with human script, but with tight, swirling Fae runes. Unseelie runes. A grimoire, Corvin spat, his voice dropping to a subterranean rumble of lethal fury. Valen's treachery runs deeper than I imagined. You are not a human asset, you are a Fey collaborator. You tracked us using dark magic and an unseelie key. He dropped the book and seized Jax by the neck, this time with the full, devastating force of his restored power. Jax instantly convulsed, his feet leaving the floor, his face turning a terrifying shade of blue. "Confess your allegiance, filth," Corvin roared, his eyes blazing with the cold light of murderous rage. The scent of ozone filled the small room, the magic pushing the boundaries of the iron vault. "No, traitor," Jax choked out, kicking uselessly. "It's Irina's legacy." The name hit Corvin like a physical blow. The High Lord froze, his powerful hand hovering, still crushing Jax's windpipe, but the lethal force momentarily halted. Irina. Jax's legacy. Corvin did not release Jax completely, but he eased his grip just enough to allow ragged, desperate gasps of air. He turned his head slowly, his eyes fixed on the ancient book lying on the concrete floor. "Irina," Corvin repeated, the name spoken with a chilling reverence and agonizing pain. "Speak, mortal. You have exactly one breath to tell me what that name means to you." Jax fell to his knees, clutching his throat, shaking with residual terror and adrenaline. He looked at the book, then at Sienna, then finally at Corvin. "That book is the Irina Codex," Jax rasped, his voice raw. "A family inheritance, passed down through 3,000 years of my lineage. My ancestor was the daughter of Lady Irina, general of the Umbra court." "Your general." Corvin stepped back, his massive body still radiating menace, but the raw, focused fury had been replaced by a stunned, agonizing recognition. "Irina, she disappeared after the Covenant. We thought her dead, a loss after the separation of the realms." "She didn't die," Jax corrected, his voice finding strength through his conviction. "She chose to stay in the human realm. She fell in love with a human guard assigned to the Covenant summit. She chose love over the veil, over the courts, over her immortal life." Sienna stared, mesmerized, the history unfolding like a terrifying, cold fairy tale. Corvin's handsome, brutal face was etched with a deep, millennia-old pain. "When the veil snapped shut 3,000 years ago," Jax continued, pushing himself to stand, his gaze now defiant, "Lady Irina was already mated to a human man. She stayed in this realm, knowing her Fey life would be short, but before she died, she made a vow of protection." Jax tapped the book with his foot. "The Codex details the Umbra royal lineage and the bloodlines that carry the resonance in the human realm. My ancestor, Irina, swore her descendants would watch over the human clan that held the Umbra Mate. That clan is yours, Sienna." He gestured to Sienna's blazing red hair. "For 3,000 years, the Jax lineage, the blood of Irina, has kept your family safe, protected from the residual threats that linger in the human realm, awaiting the next hunt. We were the Umbra's secret, mortal shield." Corvin slowly walked to the book, his cold fingers tracing the ancient runes on the leather binding. "A protective bind. A loyal general who sacrificed immortality for a mortal's kiss. She placed a bind on your bloodline, Jax, charging you with the protection of my mate's lineage. The runes confirm it." The sudden switch from ruthless executioner to grieving High Lord was jarring. Sienna felt a wave of profound sorrow through the resonance, an echo of Corvin's pain over losing a trusted general and friend. The true tracking mechanism. Sienna, feeling a desperate need to defend Jax, spoke up, her voice trembling but firm. "The tracking. The Seelie trap in the tunnel. Jax knew they were there. He told us he tracked the Fey signatures. That's why I thought he was our map." Jax shook his head. "I told you I tracked the signatures. That was a half-truth to buy time. I track Irina's bind, the protective vow she laid on your clan. It creates a faint, measurable signature on this side of the veil. It's subtle, quiet, and perfectly masked from Fey's senses, but I was trained to find it." "The moment the hunt began," Jax explained, his voice gaining the passion of a man fulfilling an ancient purpose, "the mate resonance, the energy Corvin feels, ignited in your blood. That supercharged Irina's bind. I wasn't looking for Corvin's power. I was looking for the surge in the Umbra protection signature around your family's location. The Fey don't know the bind exists. They don't know my clan exists, and that is the only reason we are all still alive." Corvin finally knelt completely, picking up the codex. The unseelie runes seemed to glow in his cold, Fey hands. He looked at the history of his lost general, written in the sacred script of his court, detailing the human bloodline now intertwined with his own survival. "Velen believed the only threat was within the Fey courts," Corvin said, his voice husky. "He never accounted for the loyalty of a general's heart. Irina, my most trusted general." Valen's hunters were tracking the raw, messy flow of the resonance, the energy of Corvin's escape, as it stabilized in the city, Jax clarified. "The ice trap was set not because they tracked you, Corvin, but because they tracked the large, unmistakable power surge from Sienna's vicinity after her initial rescue. Corvin's turbulent eyes landed on Sienna, filled now not just with possession, but with a terrifying, protective responsibility. "You are more vulnerable than I knew, little shadow. Your protection is a 3,000-year legacy. Jax has saved us both." The price of the claim. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The antagonism was gone, replaced by a tense, collaborative necessity. Corvin was no longer fighting a traitor. He was engaging with his general's descendant, a relic of a past he cherished. "Why do you stay, Jax?" Corvin asked, his gaze piercing. "Your vow is fulfilled. You found the mate and delivered her to the High Lord. The Umbra line is safe. You can disappear into the ruins of this city and live out your days." Jax, his head held high, looked directly at Corvin's face, his expression longing. "I am a descendant of a Fae general. For 3 millennia, my life has been a human existence, limited, fragile, short. I know the full history of the Fae. I know the glory and the power of the Unseelie Court. The Codex tells me that Irina's descendants, if mated to a true Fae, can reclaim their full, immortal heritage." He pointed a trembling finger at the vault door. "When the veil closes, it pulls all Fae into the realm. It will sense the Fae blood in me, however thin. But without a direct claim, a Fae Lord's backing, I will be a mortal trespasser, killed on sight. I need to return to the Unseelie realm. I need to complete my transformation. I need you to claim me as an Umbra subject, High Lord. I want my life and legacy back." Corvin considered the man, a brave, resourceful human, who held the key to his past and the means to his survival. "You risked everything for this inheritance. It is my birthright," Jax stated simply, his voice cracking with emotion. "Then you are no longer a human intermeddler," Corvin decreed, closing the ancient codex. "You are Jax, lineage of Irina. You are my scout, my eyes in this mortal coil. You will guide us through the tunnels to the day the veil closes. In exchange, I will bring you back and ensure your proper placement in the Umbra court. You will serve me in the Fae realm, and I will see your heritage reclaimed." Jax nodded, relief washing over his face, a raw human emotion that contrasted sharply with Corvin's cold, regal acceptance. The vault settled into silence, the new alliance forged in blood, betrayal, and ancient loyalty. Corvin returned to the couch, pulling Sienna back against his chest. Her red hair splayed over his dark coat, mixing the fiery human color with the icy black of the Fae Lord. The emotional turmoil had drained Sienna, but the discovery of Jax's lineage, the depth of Corvin's grief, and the knowledge of her own ancient purpose had been a powerful, exhausting sensory assault. Corvin held her close, his massive frame shielding her entirely. He lowered his head, his cold mouth finding the edge of her newly sculpted ear, his breath a plume of mint and forest scent. The resonance hummed between them, powerful and demanding. "You defended him," Corvin murmured, his voice low and possessive, laced with a dangerous approval. "You risked yourself for a human, even as you felt the cold truth of my need. The power I drew from you is stabilizing, yes, but the true, constant flow must be rewarded, little shadow. Your courage demands reassurance." His hand moved, gliding possessively over her hips, reminding her of the absolute claim he had established in the tunnel. Sienna gasped, the cold terror giving way to a fierce, unwanted heat. She was claimed in soul and body, a weapon of ancient war, and the High Lord, now secure in his knowledge and his power, would not wait for 5 days to remind her of the intimate price of her survival. Jax cleared his throat, sensing the carnal need between Corvin and Sienna. "I'll go out and look for more supplies," he said, picking up his empty bag. The necessity of privacy, even in a Fae apocalypse, was acutely human. The silent vault, their fortress of iron and concrete, became a cage of escalating, sensual inevitability. The countdown to the Fae realm continued, now marked by the steady, heavy beat of Corvin's demanding heart and the frantic, echoing pulse of Sienna's transformation. Chapter 6. One Day to Exile. The 4 days that followed the revelation of Jax's lineage blurred into a demanding, relentless cycle of training, forced proximity, and the escalating fear of the inevitable. The vault, once a sanctuary, had become a cold, metallic training ground, and the clock was ticking down to the final 24 hours of the hunt. Corvin did not allow rest. With the Mayday bond stabilized, and the full power of the resonance flowing through him, his focus shifted entirely to maximizing Sienna's new Fae abilities. He trained her in the vast, echoing outer chamber of the vault, pushing her past her human limits repeatedly, demanding absolute submission and control, recognizing that her very humanity was an asset he could ruthlessly exploit for power. His lessons were brutal, blending survival with an inescapable dark sensuality that left Sienna simultaneously terrified and addicted to the constant surge of cold, potent energy. Corvin's first lesson was forcing Sienna to channel the latent Fey energy that now resided in her core. He would have her run endless, grueling sprints across the dusty concrete floor, then abruptly stop her, forcing her to focus her hypersenses against the metallic echo of the massive vault. "The power is cold, Sienna," Corvin would rasp, his voice dangerously low as he stood inches from her panting form, his scent of mint and forest overwhelming her senses, cutting through the heavy musk of sweat and ozone. "It is not rage, it is stillness. When your human muscles scream, you must draw on the ice beneath your heart. Draw on the bond. Draw on me." He would press his cold, powerful hand against her collarbone, right over the frantic pulse of her heart, and she would instantly feel a wave of icy electric energy surge up from her core, banishing the pain and forcing her legs to move again, the fatigue melting away in a sharp, invigorating current. The process was agonizingly intimate, forcing her heart to quiet its human panic and accept the Fey energy with a terrifying alacrity. Each time she failed to draw the energy consciously, he would force the transfer, a cold, consuming press of his immense body against hers, stabilizing her with a raw, demanding contact that left them both breathless and charged, leaving behind a profound awareness of the physical claim he held. The proximity was a constant reminder of the intimate exchange they had shared in the tunnel, a necessary brutality that now defined their every shared breath. Her eyesight and hearing were now superhuman. Corvin used the iron environment to his advantage, exploiting the very metal that was toxic to his kind as a training tool. He would hide the minuscule starlight shards in the darkest corners of the vast chamber, forcing her to rely solely on her Fey sight, a cold, silver vision that saw heat signatures and energy flows rather than simple light. Her elongated ears, now permanently sculpted and exquisitely sensitive, strained against the silence, picking up the skittering of distant rats and the faint, humming distortion of Fey magic outside the iron barrier. A high-pitched, almost musical chime that only she and Corvin could register. The physical transformation accelerated with every drill. Her features became exquisitely sharp, the red of her hair seemed brighter, her hands colder, and her stamina limitless, pushing her beyond the human pain threshold. But every time she healed a sprain, or pushed past exhaustion, she was met with a deeper, more demanding surge of the mate resonance, the addictive, cold pull reminding her of the absolute claim he had over her soul and body. "Do you feel it, little shadow?" Corvin challenged her once, after a particularly brutal drill left her leaning into his immense body, her heart hammering against his chest. "The power is ours. It is no longer a human choice. It is necessity. And every surge is a reminder of the bargain we made." The lines blurred completely. Survival demanded her physical submission, the bond demanded her sensual awareness. Corvin was the demanding teacher, the brutal mate, and the singular key to her continued existence, and Sienna realized with a chilling dread that she was beginning to crave the cold, absolute certainty of his power. While Corvin trained Sienna in the internal chambers, Jax, the lineage of Irina, maintained silent watch. Using his inherited knowledge of the transit grid and the arena bind's signature, he kept track of the Fey movements outside. He would venture out into the deeper tunnels daily, seeking more supplies and more information, always returning grim and focused, his gaze heavy with the knowledge of their ancient history and Corvin's devastating power. One evening, 4 days into the hunt, Jax returned with a profound chill in his eyes. His clothes were damp, and his demeanor was taut with alarm. "Valen has changed tactics," Jax reported, spreading his map on the floor, pinning the corners with canned goods. "The Seelie are no longer sweeping the surface. They've gone deep. They are using the river tunnels, cutting off the main utility arteries into the financial district. They are not hunting for the mate. I suspect they are hunting for me. They know someone is helping you." He circled an area near the river with a piece of charcoal. "They don't know it's actually me yet, but they know that you are not alone under here, and they want to get rid of me," Corvin analyzed, his voice a low growl, tracing a line on the map with a cold finger. "Valen is a politician. He eliminates threats, both Fey and mortal. He is not stupid. Your collaboration would have been uncovered sooner or later, and he will use that connection to find us." "It's worse," Jax stated, his voice tight with genuine fear, not resentment. "The Seelie have brought out the hunters, shadow siphons." "Shadow siphons?" Sienna asked, looking between the two males. Corvin answers, "Fey bred to track mortal essence. They aren't looking for my power signature. They are looking for you and Jax. I can mask my power, and they know it will be easier to track your mortal essences over mine." Corvin looked directly at Sienna. "They will kill Jax, capture you, and leave me to die of iron poisoning when they breach the wall." Only 1 day remained until the veil closed, less than 24 hours until their escape window snapped shut. They had to choose, run, or defend the fortress they had created. It was the final night. The air in the vault was humming with unnatural stillness, the sound of the veil beginning its violent closure process echoing faintly, even through the thick concrete walls. Jax had sealed all known access points, using cement and scrap iron to fortify the smallest gaps, and Corvin was standing sentinel, his immense body radiating a cold, primal energy that was almost too intense to bear. Sienna was wrapped in her blanket, her fey ears straining for the slightest disturbance. At 2 a.m., the attack began. It didn't come through the massive vault door. It came through the ventilation system, a tiny, overlooked flaw in the iron fortress that Jax hadn't been able to seal completely. A stream of thick, freezing white vapor poured from the vents, smelling of sickened flowers and freezing earth. "Sealy gas," Corvin yelled, scrambling for cover beneath the desk. "It targets the mortal air. It induces paralysis and forces the veil to recognize human fear." Corvin moved instantly, his instincts honed by millennia of war. He seized Sienna, pulling her against his chest, shielding her from the vapor with his coat and his potent fey aura. "Breathe shallow, little shadow," Corvin commanded, his voice a roar above the hiss of the gas. "Focus the ice. Draw the power." The vapor, heavy with Sealy glamour, hit Sienna. Her lungs seized, and her muscles locked. She was paralyzed, her mind screaming. But her fey core fought back, forcing herself to channel the protective energy of the mate bond. The vapor was followed by the fey themselves, 3 shadow siphons, lean and dark, entering the chamber through a tear in the concrete that the glamour had subtly opened. They moved with a chilling silence, ignoring Corvin, their eyes fixed on Jax's location. "The collaborator," one hissed, pointing a slender, frost-tipped finger at Jax. "Eliminate the human." Jax was paralyzed by the gas, trapped behind a desk, clutching his rebar staff uselessly. Corvin released Sienna, shoving her toward Jax. "Protect him, Sienna." "Use the ice." Corvin himself lunged toward the siphons. He couldn't risk physical contact with their pure Sealy magic, as it would exploit the remaining trace of iron in his system. He fought by manipulating the environment, striking the rebar and the iron structures with concentrated blasts of kinetic energy, generating sparks and intense vibrations that forced the siphons to recoil in pain. Sienna, her own muscles struggling against the paralyzing gas, reached Jax. She couldn't draw enough power to fight the siphons, but she could shield. Drawing on the instinctual knowledge of the bond, she did the only thing she could. She wrapped her own body around Jax's paralyzed form, shielding him with her own rapidly strengthening fey shell, using her life force as a barrier against the freezing glamour. The siphons recognized the move instantly. The mate shields the traitor. One of the siphons raised its hand, preparing a blast of pure, freezing magic aimed directly at Sienna's head, the quickest way to shatter the human shell and reclaim the mate resonance. Before the blast could hit, Corvin roared, and with a desperate surge of unseelie power, he struck the large, steel counterweight of the elevator shaft. The massive weight crashed down with a deafening metallic shriek, trapping one of the siphons beneath the weight and shaking the very foundation of the vault. The remaining siphons, realizing the High Lord was dangerously unpredictable, retreated instantly through the ruptured wall, leaving the choking gas and the frozen corpse of their comrade behind. Siphons were excellent trackers but cowardly fighters. The danger passed, leaving behind a terrifying stillness. Corvin stood over the wreckage, breathing heavily, his immense body shivering, the brutal effort draining him once more. He quickly dragged Sienna and Jax out of the gassed room and back into the small nook. Sienna was hyperventilating, but Jax was safe beneath her body. Her fey ears were throbbing, and her skin felt stretched tight over her sharpening features. She felt the immediate, desperate drain on her core. Corvin, sensing the need, ripped his coat off and pressed his freezing body against hers, stabilizing the flow. The primal intimacy of the exchange was undeniable, even under the shadow of death. "They failed," Corvin gasped, his voice raspy. "But they will return. Valen will not allow you to leave this realm alive if you cannot be claimed. We move now," Jax whispered, finally regaining control of his diaphragm. "I know a final escape tunnel, a storm drain that leads directly to the lakefront, close to the Vale's original tier point. We must go while the siphons regroup." Corvin looked at Sienna, his eyes raw with urgency and need. Only one day remained, less than 24 hours. His power was dangerously low again, weakened by the battle and the pervasive iron. "The flow is corrupted again, little shadow," Corvin hissed, pulling her impossibly close, his mint and forest scent dominating her senses. "I require the final draw to break the surface glamour and secure the transport through the Vale. This time, there will be no retreat. I will take what is required, and the bond will be final, in all but the Fey ritual." Sienna, exhausted and terrified, but feeling the cold, necessary heat of the bond surge between them, nodded into his shoulder. She was beyond resistance. Her survival, her transformation, and Corvin's crown were all tied to this final, desperate, and utterly necessary submission. One day, Sienna whispered, the last vestige of her human voice fading as the fey coldness settled deep within her. Let's finish the hunt. The trio gathered their meager supplies. Corvin, stabilized by the renewed promise of the ultimate draw, led the way, following Jax's instructions into the deepest, darkest utility storm drains beneath the vault. The hunt was reaching its bloody, intimate conclusion at the edge of Lake Michigan. Chapter 7. The Bloody Gate and the Crown of Ice. The final 24 hours were measured not in ticks of a clock, but in the rapid, sickening beat of Sienna's human heart, trying to keep pace with the cold stillness of her new fey core. Jax led them through a suffocating lattice of deep, concrete-lined storm drains, the air thick with stagnant water and the metallic scent of iron decay. The final exit, Jax had explained, was an archaic overflow pipe near the lakefront, the precise location where the veil had been weakest years ago, the seam already stretched thin by the closing cycle. They emerged not into quiet sanctuary, but into a bloody ambush. 4 imposing Seelie guards, encased in light armor that shimmered like polished ice, stood waiting. They were accompanied by 2 shadow siphons, their features blurred by localized glamour, their eyes focused with deadly certainty on Jax and Sienna. Valen had anticipated their final move. The ground here was soaked and slick, a mixture of mud, sand, and the unnatural condensation of the closing veil, which shimmered violently just 50 feet away over the black, choppy waters of Lake Michigan. The human and the High Lord's pet, one of the guards sneered, his voice ringing with cold contempt. A disappointing end to such a tedious hunt. Corvin, his massive form already radiating a bone-deep cold, moved instantly. He shoved Sienna behind him, the force almost knocking the breath from her body, securing her against the sheer wall of his back. Draw on me, little shadow, he commanded, his voice a lethal whisper in her ear. They will try to claim you before they kill you. The battle was not a duel. It was a desperate, primal scramble for survival against overwhelming odds. Corvin knew the siphons were the real threat, but the guards were heavily armed with lances tipped with enchanted iron, enough to stop even an unseelie High Lord in his tracks. One of the siphons struck first, not with magic but with pure speed, lunging toward Sienna. Her human training kicked in. She ducked under Corvin's arm, but her fey instincts took over her movements. She felt the ice beneath her heart surge, and her movements became impossibly fluid, her body twisting away from the siphon's grasp. Jax, the veil, Corvin roared, his voice thick with the strain of fighting 3 armored guards simultaneously. He moved with a devastating economy of violence, each strike of his fist or foot shattering armor and bone, but the iron tips grazed his arms, drawing dark, steaming blood that hissed as it hit the wet earth. Sienna watched in horror and fascination as the iron poison began its slow creep, mottling the pale skin of his arms. She knew he was reaching the limit of his endurance. She had to act. She scanned the scene with her fey sight, seeing the shimmering flow of energy. The siphon's glamour was weak, constantly being pulled back by the closure of the veil. Jax, meanwhile, was frantically pulling apart a grate covering the storm drain, working on the ancient mortal mechanism that would drain enough water to create a brief, stabilizing path to the tear. Seeing Corvin staggering slightly under the relentless attack of the guards, Sienna acted on pure, animal instinct. She gathered all the fey energy she had channeled over the last 4 days, the cold strength, the unnatural stillness, the raw power of the unseelie. She focused it not on attack, but on Corvin. She pressed her palm, now cold as polished marble, against the small of his back, right where the spine met the core. She didn't seek his power. She shoved her own growing, desperate strength into him, a reckless, shocking act of transference. The contact was explosive. The mate resonance, the lifeblood of their bond, ignited. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Corvin's eyes, already glowing with fury, flared sapphire blue. The iron spots on his skin vanished as the sheer force of the energy purified his blood. The guards, momentarily stunned by the light and power, hesitated. A fatal mistake. Corvin turned into a blur of black shadow and ice. He snatched the lance from the nearest guard, snapping the iron tip like a twig, before plunging the remaining shaft through the guard's chest. He used the momentum to pivot, delivering a devastating kick to the second guard, sending him flying into the lake. The third guard, paralyzed by fear, was simply crushed beneath Corvin's weight. The 2 siphons, realizing the mate was now an active, potent source of the High Lord's power, shrieked and retreated, their glamour flickering wildly as they fled toward the remaining Seelie forces gathering on the high bank. The attack was broken, but the price was paid. Corvin was still alive, but the transfer had been a reckless, absolute investment in the bond. He turned to Sienna, his breath ragged, his eyes intense and possessive. He seized her face, his thumbs brushing the sharp curve of her newly sculpted cheekbones. "Never risk such a thing again without my command, little shadow," he hissed, the danger in his voice edged with a primal hunger. But the power, it is magnificent. You are mine, body and source. He kissed her then, a savage, consuming press of lips that tasted of blood and ozone, and the metallic cold of pure unseelie magic, confirming the dominance that he had taken, and she had now accepted. Now, Jax, Corvin commanded, pulling away, his attention immediately snapping back to the escape. Jax, pale but resolute, pulled the final lever. A sudden, violent torrent of water erupted from the pipe, revealing the veil just outside. Over the water, the shimmering tear that was the gateway to the Fey world, was a maelstrom of iridescent color, a swirling, chaotic door of pure magic. "We go, now," Jax screamed, looking at the other Seelie soldiers heading their way. Corvin grabbed Sienna, tucking her against his side, then grabbed Jax by his forearm, and launched himself across the narrow gap. They plunged through the chaotic energy of the veil, the transition feeling like being simultaneously pulled apart and reforged, a momentary white-hot agony that stole her breath and every human notion she possessed. They crashed out of the veil onto soft, cold earth, the scent of damp moss, pine, and clean, freezing air replacing the rot of the city. They were in a dense forest, the ancient, knotted trees draped in hoarfrost, the unseelie wilderness. The sky above was a permanent twilight, lit only by the cold, distant glow of twin moons. Corvin landed perfectly, his grip on Sienna steady, his body already absorbing the healing energy of his own realm. His eyes swept the perimeter, alert for any immediate threats, the change in environment already restoring his strength. Sienna pushed herself up, inhaling the Fey air, and felt an instantaneous, profound change. The air no longer burned her lungs. It was nourishment. Her Fey ears no longer strained. They absorbed the silence of the ancient woods. The bond with Corvin, which had been a desperate electric lifeline, settled into a deep, cold, humming certainty in her core, the heaviness of the iron and steel tunnels lifting like a heavy, damp veil. She was home, though she had never seen this place before. She was unseelie. Then, a sickening, choked gasp ripped through the stillness. Jax, who was standing up and taking in his surroundings, fell back to his knees. "Jax." Sienna moved instantly, her instincts overriding all of Corvin's training. She knelt beside him, noticing the immediate, shocking physical change. His skin was turning an unnatural, sickly gray, and dark, almost crystalline veins were spiderwebbing across his face. "Don't touch him!" Corvin's command was sharp and absolute, his hand clamping down on Sienna's arm, his grip hard enough to bruise. Sienna ignored him, reaching for Jax's face. "Jax, what is it? Are you poisoned?" Jax could only make choking sounds, his back arching, his body convulsing. It looked like a seizure, but more visceral, more agonizing. "It is not poison, little shadow," Corvin said, his voice flat and hard, forcing her to look at him. "It is the land. It recognizes the lineage of Irina. Jax's Fey blood is fighting his human blood." "But he was Fey-bound," Sienna protested, fighting against Corvin's grip, desperate to ease the obvious pain. "He should have transitioned like I did." "You had the resonance. You had the mate bond to channel and stabilize the transformation. He has none. Only his long dormant blood," Corvin explained, cold logic warring with the primal concern in his eyes. He tightened his hold, preventing her from touching Jax, who was now writhing on the ground, his clothing tearing under the force of the internal struggle. Jax's Fey self was bound in an iron-rich realm to protect himself. That bind has now snapped. His Fey ancestry is pure, but it is fighting through 400 years of mortal dilution. It is reclaiming him from the inside out. "But he's dying," Sienna cried, her heart, the Fey part of it, aching with a fierce, possessive need to protect the human who had saved them. Corvin pulled her back against his chest, holding her tight, forcing her to watch. His immense body was a wall of cold, unyielding dominance. "He is not dying. He is being purged." "Every moment of this agony is necessary, Sienna. It is the payment required for his true power. If you interfere, you will stabilize the human side, and he will be forever trapped, neither human nor fully Fey, a useless husk." Jax's mouth opened in an agonizing silent scream. Slowly, agonizingly, Jax's convulsions subsided. His skin took on a shade that was undeniably Fey, a pale, ethereal white. His jawline sharpened, his body lengthened, and his dark eyes, when they finally fluttered open, were no longer the deep brown of a mortal, but a brilliant, intense amber. He had the striking, severe beauty of a pure unseelie. He sat up, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He felt the moss beneath his hands, the cold air on his skin, and the sudden, vast presence of the Fey realm in his mind. He looked at Corvin, then at Sienna, his new amber eyes filled with a clear, ancient knowing that had been absent before, the amber eyes of Irina's line. "The lineage is recovered," Jax said, his voice now carrying the deep, resonant tone of a Fey noble. He touched the ground, then offered Sienna a wry, strained smile. A deeply unpleasant process. Thank you, High Lord, for the necessary cruelty. You could have warned me before we jumped through the veil, though. Corvin released Sienna, giving Jax a sharp nod of acknowledgement. The political and familiar tension between them was momentarily paused, replaced by the grim solidarity of their shared survival. Sienna felt a rush of relief, instantly replaced by a wave of possessive jealousy as she realized Jax too was now fully of this world. She, on the other hand, could still feel the humanity in her. Corvin caught the subtle shift in her mood, the sudden, jealous grip of the mate bond, and his lips curved into a slow, predatory smile. He reached out and stroked the newly sharp curve of her jaw, reminding her with that single cold touch that the mastery was his. We waste no more time, Corvin stated. The veil is closing entirely. Valen will know we are here. His minions must have told him we made it through, to the court. The journey through the unseelie forest was a profound change from the terrifying urban scramble. Here, Corvin was High Lord, and his power was palpable, a cold, dominating force that smoothed their path and parted the ancient freezing branches. Corvin walked with Sienna at his side, Jax trailing respectfully behind. The bond was a live wire between them. Corvin would often reach out, his hand resting possessively on her hip or shoulder, an intimate, public declaration of her new status. The contact was purely for the assertion of his dominance, and to stabilize her connection to the Fey realm, yet every touch sent a shiver of awareness through Sienna that was now less human shock and more Fey anticipation. Do you feel the pull, little shadow? Corvin murmured as they walked beneath the canopy of ancient, moss-draped trees. This land is ours. It feeds the ice in your core. It accepts you as the first mate. I feel cold, Sienna admitted, her voice lower now, almost a purr, the human pitch gone. And strong. And utterly claimed. Good, Corvin replied, pulling her closer, his hips brushing hers with a deliberate, calculated movement that sent a surge of heat and cold through her. The fear is gone. Now only the need remains. She knew his touch was meant to assert control, a constant, physical reminder of the debt she owed. But she also knew it was feeding the primal hunger he now felt for her. A hunger amplified by the final, reckless power transfer at the Veil. The physical attraction that had been a slow burn had turned into a desperate, consuming fire. After hours of relentless travel, the dense forest finally gave way to a towering, impossibly black structure, the Citadel of Shadows, the ancient seat of the unseelie High Lords. It was a fortress carved from obsidian and dark granite, rising into the perpetual twilight, cold and utterly magnificent. The gates were manned by silent, grim-faced unseelie guards. They did not move, but the shock that rippled through them was evident. They had been told their High Lord was dead, vanished beyond the veil, dethroned by the usurper Valen. Corvin strode through the gates, radiating an aura of cold, absolute power. The ground seemed to crackle beneath his heavy boots, and the temperature of the air plummeted as he passed. Sienna, walking beside him, felt her head rise with an instinctual Fey pride. She was the mate, the source. And she was entering her domain. The throne room was a vast, echoing chamber, lit by sputtering, cold blue flames. The sight was stunning. Hundreds of unseelie courtiers, generals, and nobles were assembled, waiting. They were beings of sharp shadows and cold beauty, their faces etched with centuries of political maneuvering and silent cruelty. Seated upon the massive black obsidian throne, the throne of ice and tears, was Valen, the Ethel traitor. Valen was pale, beautiful in a cold, precise way, and impeccably dressed in the High Lord's ceremonial armor of midnight blue and silver. He was the picture of a usurper who had found the crown too heavy. When Corvin and Sienna appeared in the main archway, a visible gasp rippled through the hundreds assembled, who parted their way and bowed as he passed. Valen's composure shattered. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The unseelie court held its breath. Corvin had not only returned, but he had done the impossible. He had returned with the mate, fully transformed and radiating unseelie power. The sheer magical energy coming off the pair was a physical blow to the assembled nobles. Corvin stopped at the foot of the dais, his presence extinguishing the false confidence in the room. Jax stepped into the chamber behind them, his newly powerful face self standing as silent, amber-eyed testimony to the lineage's return. Valen, Corvin's voice was low, yet it echoed through the entire chamber, a deep, resonating challenge that held the chill of 1,000-year winter. I see you have kept the seat warm, a considerate gesture for a traitor. Valen finally found his voice, attempting a show of defiance that sounded weak and hollow. Corvin, you are alive. Your return is unexpected. I was merely fulfilling my duty as regent, maintaining order after your inexplicable absence. Silence, Corvin commanded, and the single word was enough to silence not only Valen, but the entire, vast assembly. He stepped closer to the throne, his eyes twin sapphires of focused intensity. He reached out and took Sienna's hand, lacing their fingers together, raising their joined hands for the court to see the raw, undeniable magic flowing between them, the proof of the completed bond. "The hunt is over," Corvin declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "The first mate is claimed. The power is restored. The veil is closed." He looked directly at Valen, forcing the usurper to meet his gaze. "The Unseelie court will answer to its rightful High Lord, not to a glorified caretaker who attempted my assassination." Valen's eyes darted frantically, searching the crowd for support, but the nobles were terrified. They had chosen the side they believed was winning. Now the winner was here, radiating enough power to obliterate the entire room. Valen slowly, grudgingly, rose from the throne. The movement was stiff, every millimeter an act of immense, internal struggle. He descended the 3 steps of the dais, stopping just short of the High Lord. "The power of the mate bond is undeniable, High Lord," Valen stated, his voice tight with hatred and humiliation. "I concede. The crown is yours." He reached up, and with a slow, agonizing motion, lifted the circlet of woven black iron and crystallized sapphire from his own head. Sienna expected Corvin to lash out instantly, to rip Valen limb from limb for his treason. But Corvin stood still, his gaze piercing, calculating. He was not merely a warrior, he was a king. "No, Valen," Corvin said, the cold edge of his control unnerving. "You will keep your head, for now." A collective gasp went through the court. Jax, standing behind, looked momentarily confused. "I know the Ethel did not operate alone," Corvin continued, his voice dangerously soft, yet carrying the weight of ancient judgment. He looked out over the assembled courtiers, letting his eyes linger on the pale, panicked faces. Traitors lie among the ancient lines of this court, those who helped Valen orchestrate the assassination attempt, who facilitated the freezing of the veil, who wished to see the Unseelie shattered by human iron. "You all believed I wouldn't rise again." He held out his hand, and Valen, trembling slightly, placed the crown into his palm. Corvin ignored the crown, turning his gaze back to Valen. "If I kill you now, Valen, your conspirators will vanish back into the shadows. I will not grant them that easy mercy," Corvin said. "You will stand beside me, a living testament to my forbearance. You will one day tell me each and every one of their names. Once I siphon them out and strip you of your power, then you can go back to your seat." Valen's eyes widened, knowing Corvin's mercy was not really mercy, but had made him a target. His allies would be the ones after his life now, so as to keep his silence. He placed the crown not on his own head, but lightly upon Sienna's brow. The black iron against her pale, newly phased skin was stark, a shocking symbol of her power and her claim. Sienna stiffened, but held Corvin's gaze, understanding the public display of dominance. Corvin's hand lingered, touching the circlet, then tracing the curve of her skull. He leaned in, his minty breath brushing her ear, the action intensely private in the most public of spaces. "This, Valen, is what you were unable to touch," Corvin murmured, loud enough for the entire court to hear. "The mate, the true source of the Unseelie power. She is bound to me, and through her, my power is infinite. You will obey your High Lord, and you will wait for the inevitable." Corvin did not release Sienna. He pressed his body flush against hers, his height towering, his scent flooding her senses. He was asserting his rightful place as High Lord, and he was using her body, the ultimate symbol of his triumph, to do it. He kissed her again, this time a slow, deliberate claiming that was a spectacle of sensual power for the entire court. His mouth devoured hers, his hand gripping her waist, pulling her impossibly close. It was a kiss of domination, of possession, and a promise of the intimacy that had been necessary for survival, but was now a demand of his power. Sienna gasped, the cold energy in her core surging to meet his, the public display of his hunger turning her knees weak. When he finally pulled back, Corvin did not look at Valen or the assembly. His eyes were locked on Sienna's, a blazing sapphire promise. He then picked her up and sat upon the throne of ice and tears, settling her deliberately onto his lap, her body cradled against his. "The court is dismissed," Corvin stated, resting his chin on the newly crowned Sienna's shoulder, his eyes already calculating, watchful, and intensely possessive. "Jax, you will remain. Valen, you may stand at the foot of the dais. You and I have much to talk about." Valen's eyes widened even more, a plea on his face for Corvin to take his life. The Unseelie can be cruel and slow in their torturous death. A quick death was more preferable than the games they'll start playing on him. Chapter 8. The Price of Treason and the Ceremony of Ice. The quiet after the storm, the vast obsidian throne room of the Citadel of Shadows emptied like a drained reservoir, The hundreds of courtiers, stiff and pale with terror, retreated into the echoing gloom, their whispers and frantic sidelong glances following Corvin's every move. The only ones who remained were Corvin, still seated on the throne of ice and tears with Sienna cradled possessively in his lap, Jax, standing sentinel a dozen paces away, and Valen, the former usurper, frozen in humiliation at the foot of the dais. The crown, cool and heavy on Sienna's brow, no longer felt like a mere object. It felt like an extension of Corvin's will, a symbol of the immense, cold power she had just accepted. Resting against his chest, her senses were overwhelmed by the Fey realm. She could feel the ancient granite of the citadel vibrating with power, the twin moons outside pouring raw magic through the high arched windows, and Corvin's heartbeat, slow, heavy, and absolute, thrumming beneath her ear. The human part of her, the empathic, fearful part, was shrinking rapidly, replaced by a crystalline awareness, sharp and cold, that absorbed the scene with a terrifying detachment. Corvin was silent, his sapphire gaze sweeping over Valen. "You have a chance, Ethel," Corvin finally stated, his voice devoid of anger, which made it far more chilling than any roar. "You will tell me every co-conspirator who helped you, every name, every ancient line, every soldier you compromised with Sealy iron. You will earn your inevitable death slowly, by serving as my ledger." Valen simply stared at the floor, his defeat a visible, agonizing burden. "They will kill me before I speak, High Lord," he rasped. "Precisely," Corvin confirmed, the corner of his mouth twitching into a smile that promised centuries of suffering. "Let the fear motivate them. Their panic is the best surveillance I could ask for." Jax, looking remarkably serene in his newly manifested, pure unseelie form, stepped forward. "High Lord, don't you think the conspirators will try to flee the citadel? They could already be making contingency plans." "Then let them try," Corvin responded. He stroked Sienna's cheek with his thumb, checking the stillness in her eyes. "Their frantic efforts will expose their ranks. Jax, I am tasking you with setting up my internal security, the eyes and ears I lacked. You will report directly to the first mate. She is your link to my command." Sienna straightened slightly on his lap, the cold weight of responsibility settling alongside the crown. She looked at Jax. Her jealousy from the woods completely vanished, replaced by a shared, grim solidarity. "I require a full manifest of the guard and the Ethel House's immediate assets, Jax. I need to know who is missing before the sun sets." "It will be done, First Mate," Jax confirmed, his amber eyes reflecting her own cold resolve, settling into his new life seamlessly. He bowed, a gesture of respect and allegiance that solidified her new rank, and retreated. Before Corvin could give further orders, the massive obsidian doors opened again, and a cloaked figure strode into the room, cutting through the heavy air with purposeful steps. This was not a fleeing courtier seeking clemency. This was someone returning with intent. The return of the general. The figure stopped before the dais and dropped immediately to one knee, the clatter of his light, black iron armor echoing through the room. "High Lord Corvin," the figure said, his voice deep and rough, choked with emotion. "General Iris, return to your service. I refused to believe the lies of your death, but I could not serve under the usurper. I waited at the edge of the wilds for your signal, or your ghost." He glared at Valen with a burning hatred. Iris was the twin brother of Irina, and both were powerful generals, counted among the High Lord's most trusted commanders. He had been so devastated by the news of Corvin's supposed death that he had abandoned the court, unwilling to bow to Valen. Corvin eased Sienna to the side of the throne, standing slowly to his full, formidable height. "Iris, your loyalty is noted and appreciated." He paused, looking the general over. "Rise, General. There is a matter you must attend to immediately." Iris rose, and Sienna finally saw him clearly. His beauty was sharper, older, and more battle-hardened than Corvin's, his hair a shade lighter black, pulled back from a severe, angular face. His eyes, however, were the most striking feature, the exact shade of Jax's, a brilliant, ancient amber. Corvin gestured towards Jax, who had just returned to the room. "General, allow me to introduce Jax, the last of Irina's direct lineage, now fully transformed." Iris's composure, which had survived years of war and the shock of seeing his resurrected High Lord, shattered instantly. He looked at Jax, then back at Corvin, his mouth opening in a silent gasp of anguish. Jax simply gave a low, deferential nod. "The confirmation, then," Iris murmured, the raw grief evident in his tone. "My sister, she is truly gone, but her memory lives in the blood. Welcome, kin." He extended his hand to Jax, who grasped it in silent acknowledgement. For a moment, the two amber-eyed Fae stood together, the last fragments of a proud, lost bloodline. Corvin allowed the moment to a familial mourning, a political move that subtly solidified his ties to one of the most powerful ancient houses in the Unseelie court. Then, his face hardened. "Iris, I require your true strength now. You are trusted." You are discreet. You know the shadows of this court better than any living soul. My loyalty is absolute, High Lord, Iris vowed. Good. I need you to do what Jax cannot, move invisibly amongst the high houses. I need the truth, not the desperate lies of men trying to save their own necks. I want a complete, definitive list of every lord who knowingly aided Valen in my attempted assassination, who compromised this realm, and who failed to act against the Seelie. I want the names, the evidence, and the tally of their offenses. The execution requires absolute certainty. It will be done by the first lighting of the twin moons tomorrow night, High Lord, Iris promised, his eyes now alight with the cold fire of vengeance. And the traitors will be rooted out. One more thing, Corvin added, looking at Sienna. Ensure your mate, Lyra, attends to the first mate. She requires a guide and a tutor in the ways of this court. Lyra's grace and political acumen are necessary. Iris's gaze softened momentarily toward Sienna, a clear respect in his amber eyes. Of course, High Lord. Lyra will be honored to serve the first mate. The tutor and the traitor's silence. Lyra, Iris's mate, was the antithesis of the severe, battle-worn general. She was tall, with flowing silver-white hair, and a calm, dark-skinned, ethereal presence. Where Corvin's power felt like a glacier, Lyra's felt like a deep, frozen lake, immensely cold, but tranquil and reflective. The next day, as Corvin and Jax pored over security reports, Lyra found Sienna in the private chambers assigned to the first mate, a breathtaking suite carved from black ice and starlit obsidian. First mate, Lyra greeted her with a graceful bow, her voice like wind chimes. I am Lyra. My lord has asked me to assist you in navigating your new domain. Sienna, please, Sienna replied, stepping away from the floor-to-ceiling window that offered a stunning view of the Unseelie forest. She was dressed in simple, tailored black garments, already replacing the human clothes she'd arrived in. I have a crown on my head, but I know nothing of this world, Lyra smiled, a genuinely kind gesture that was rare among the Unseelie. The High Lord is wise. You have the power, but not yet the knowledge. You must understand that the Fey realm is not like the human world. Here, power is truth. You are the mate. That is a biological, metaphysical fact that cannot be challenged. But you are also the High Queen. That is a political office, and it must be understood and defended. Over the course of the day, Lyra guided Sienna through the citadel, explaining the functions of the different levels and houses. She taught Sienna the intricate history of the mating hunt, how the scarcity of mates required the Unseelie to venture into the mortal realm, and how each successful bond brought a surge of raw, vital power, the mate resonance, to the court. When the Seelie began their own mating hunts, tearing tiny rifts in the divide with the help of their mages, Lyra explained as they walked through a silent library of magically preserved scrolls, their power base grew exponentially. Every Seelie lord who returned with a successfully bonded mate made the Seelie court stronger. Meanwhile, Lord Corvin's advisors, led by Valen and his allies, convinced him that the hunt was beneath him, that he should wait for a pure Fey queen to emerge within the realm. This was a lie, a means to keep the Unseelie power stagnant and vulnerable. Sienna absorbed it all, the cold knowledge feeding her Fey core. She had thought the veil only opened once every 3 millennia. She realized her initial fear of Corvin was less about him as a person, and more about the frightening primal power that was now her birthright. The darkness and ice of the citadel did not feel threatening. They felt like nourishment. She ran her hand over a wall of polished granite, feeling the cold energy seep into her palm. She was fascinated by the way the realm responded to her, the permanent twilight feeling entirely natural. The fact that Corvin, a high lord who had been imprisoned in the Iron Fortress, succeeded where his entire court failed, is why they now fear you so profoundly, Sienna, Lyra concluded. You are the living symbol of his triumph and their treason. As dusk settled, a new wave of frantic whispering began to ripple through the lower levels. The rumors became fact when a junior guard rushed breathlessly to Corvin's private meeting room. Valen, the usurper, was dead. He had been found in his temporary quarters, dressed and seated at a desk, his head resting peacefully on his arms as if asleep. There was no sign of struggle, no weapon, only a small, intricate crystalline wound at the base of his skull. A surgical strike that only one of his magically proficient inner circle could have executed. Valen's allies, terrified that Corvin's promise of slow death would lead to their own exposure, had silenced him permanently. Corvin received the news with cold satisfaction. Jax, Iris, Lyra, he commanded, having summoned them immediately. Valen's silencing confirms Iris's list is accurate. They are cornered and panicked. The time for the purge is now. Assemble the entire court in the throne room at midnight. The general has the names. The day of reckoning. The midnight assembly was unlike the previous day's stunned chaos. This was an execution by decree. The great throne room was packed shoulder to shoulder with the entire Unseelie nobility. The lighting was even colder, the blue flames of the sconces barely holding back the shadows. Corvin sat upon the throne, not relaxed but coiled, a breathtaking, terrifying figure of absolute power. Sienna was at his right hand, sitting on a matching throne next to him, wearing a gown of dark velvet, woven with shimmering threads that mimicked the hoarfrost outside, the crown of ice glinting on her head. She did not look afraid. She looked like a queen. The collective power of the mate bond was so immense that many of the lesser fae visibly shivered. Iris stood at the foot of the dais, rigid and armed, Jax silently flanking him. Corvin let the silence draw out until it was suffocating. Then, his voice dropped, carrying the weight of ancient law. You believed me dead. You allowed a traitor to sit upon the throne of ice and tears. You allowed your power to stagnate while the Seelie court gathered strength. I asked my general to provide me with a list of the treacherous among you. That list will be dealt with. But first, there is a reckoning that concerns your very nature. Corvin turned his intense sapphire gaze onto a section of the courtiers, the high lords and ladies who were clearly mated but had failed in their fundamental duty to the Unseelie court. You, Corvin's voice snapped, pointing a finger at Lord Kalin, a centuries-old lord known for his arrogance. You have a mate, an ancient bond. Your duty to the Unseelie is to ensure that your line, and therefore the court, increases in power. Yet you have produced no heir, acquired no new strength. You did not let any of your clan participate in the mating hunt. You allowed your brothers to fail. Explain your pathetic state, Lord Kalin stammered, his arrogance instantly replaced by fear. High Lord, we were assured that the human realm was beneath our dignity, that the mate bond could only be achieved with a pure fae of this realm. Lies spread by Valen to keep me weak. But then, you chose to believe those lies because everyone well knows that before the shift, humans and fae used to forge mate bonds, Corvin thundered, the force of his voice shaking the obsidian walls. Look at your queen. He grasped Sienna's forearm, the public touch and assertion of the bond. She was human. She is now the first mate, the High Queen, and the source of power that purifies my blood from iron. You listened to lies and sacrificed the strength of our realm for petty politics, for your immediate comfort. The Seelie gain power while you waste yours. He challenged lord after lord, peeling back the layers of self-serving excuses and political cowardice. The true fear of the court was not execution. It was the shame of being exposed as weak and subservient to the Seelie threat. Finally, Corvin held up a hand. Enough. Your weakness is a crime against your own lineage. Your treason, however, is against the entire foundations of the Unseelie, and is unforgivable. He gestured to Iris. General. Read the roll of dishonor. Iris's voice, rough and cold, cut through the tension. He began reading the names, ancient family lines, generals and key advisors. One by one, those named were seized by Jax and the loyal guards who had waited silently in the shadows, their features grim. Lord Torvin, of the House of Shadow, for compromising the northern defenses and accepting Seelie gold. Lady Lirin, of the House of Ice, for providing Valen with access to the Veil's freezing magic. The list was 20 names long, including 3 of the court's most powerful generals. The traitors were dragged to the center of the room. Corvin stood, descending the dais. He stopped before the terrified, kneeling lords. You committed the highest crime. You tried to extinguish the line of the High Lord to serve your own selfish ambition. You sought the destruction of the Unseelie court. With a movement too fast for mortal eyes, Corvin unsheathed his sword, a blade of pure black crystal that seemed to absorb all light in the room, the Sorrow of Stars. A single, agonizing shriek tore through the air as Corvin executed the first traitor, a blinding flash of cold sapphire magic erupting from the crystalline blade. The others did not scream. They simply knelt and waited. The stench of ozone and dark blood filled the air. Sienna watched, sitting her ground, the ice in her core humming. This was the brutality of the Fey world. The necessary cruelty Corvin had shown Jax, now multiplied 20-fold. Her human heart would have wept. Her Fey core felt only the cold, hard certainty of justice and exhilaration. When the last of the 20 traitors had fallen, Corvin sheathed his sword. The silence was absolute. He then turned to the remaining courtiers. Let this be a lesson. Loyalty is rewarded. Treachery is swift and absolute. He then made his final, most unexpected political move. He focused on a small, pale lord named Arian, who stood near the back, shaking. Arian was Valen's younger cousin, often accused of being part of the conspiracy, but Iris's report had exonerated him. Lord Arian, step forward, Corvin commanded. Arian stumbled, terrified that his name had been missed on the execution list. He knelt before the blood-soaked dais. You are the last remaining lord of the Aethel House, Corvin announced, his voice carrying clearly to every corner. Your cousin has paid the price for his ambition. Your hands, however, are clean. Arian, I appoint you the new Lord of the Aethel. Your house will serve as my testament to the court, that I reward clean loyalty, even among the kin of traitors. Do not fail me. Arian, stunned and tearful, swore his eternal loyalty. The court, witnessing the cold balance of Corvin's justice, ruthless to enemies, gracious to the loyal, understood that a new era of absolute rule had begun. The court is dismissed, Corvin stated. The cleanup begins. Jax, ensure Valen's body is added to this pile. Let the dead keep company with the dead. The sealing ceremony. Hours later, the citadel was once again silent, scrubbed clean of blood, the traitors removed. Corvin and Sienna stood alone in a small private chamber deep within the citadel's highest spire. The chamber was not made of ice or stone, but living, shimmering sapphire crystal that absorbed the moonlight, making the air crackle with latent magic. It is time, first mate, Corvin said, his voice soft now, devoid of the harshness he used for the court. He removed the crown of ice from her head and placed it gently on a pedestal. The public declaration is complete. Now, we make the bond unbreakable. Sienna felt a surge of anticipation. Her blood, now fully fey, understood the gravity of this ancient rite. What must I do? You must accept. Fully, permanently, and absolutely. The bond we share is born of survival and power, but the sealing is the binding of our very souls into a single immortal entity, Corvin explained, his eyes glowing intensely. He took her hands and led her to the center of the room, where a low pedestal of black basalt held a bowl of clear, freezing water. He lifted his own ceremonial dagger, an antique blade of pure, non-iron silver, and pressed the tip to his palm, drawing a single line of thick, dark blood. In the sight of the twin moons, by the ice of my core, I bind my power, my longevity, and my will to yours, Sienna. I give you the mastery of my essence, even as I claim yours. He pressed the bleeding cut to her lips. The taste was metallic, cold, and electric, sending a dizzying wave of power through her. Sienna took the blade from him, her hand steady, and pressed the cold silver to her own palm, drawing a similar, deep line of fey blood. Her transformation was complete. The blood that flowed was dark and thick with power. She raised her palm to his, pressing the two wounds together. The contact was explosive, not pain, but the fusion of two immense cold forces. A brilliant flash of sapphire light erupted, and a humming resonated deep in their bones. In the sight of my new home, by the strength of my claimed existence, I bind my essence, my light, and my loyalty to yours, Corvin, Sienna recited, the ancient words coming to her with instinctual certainty. I accept your dominance and grant you my power. We are one. As their blood mingled, the resonance surged, no longer a desperate lifeline, but a vast, silent ocean of shared energy. The ice in her core flared into brilliant life, permanently sealed to Corvin's own immense power. Her fey nature, which had been tentative and new, settled into a deep, cold, and breathtaking certainty. She looked at Corvin, and saw not just a high lord, but the absolute center of her world, the cold, primal force that defined her existence. Corvin's eyes were ablaze with sapphire fire, his chest heaving with the force of the combined power. He kissed her, not with the savage need of the ambush, but with the deep, slow reverence of a king claiming his queen. When he broke the kiss, he pressed his forehead to hers, breathing in the scent of her power. It is done. You are eternal, Sienna. You are mine, and I am yours. The unseelie court will bow to its high queen. Sienna inhaled the air, which now felt like liquid magic, feeling the citadel, the cold forest, and the twin moons outside as extensions of herself. The complexity of the human world, the confusion and the fear were finally gone, replaced by the profound, beautiful simplicity of pure fey power. The brutal, magnificent fey realm had claimed her, and in claiming her, Corvin had given her everything. She finally understood. She didn't just feel strong, she felt like home. Chapter 9. The Sun and the Shadow. The journey to the mating games was, by necessity, a grand procession. No longer were Corvin and Sienna furtive shadows stealing across the mortal world. They were the High Lord and High Queen of the Unseelie Court, flanked by the newly loyal generals Iris and Jax, and a dozen High Lords who had survived the purge. They traveled not through the veil, but by a powerful crystalline gateway Corvin personally tore open, proving his renewed, terrifying strength. The destination was the Solar Spire, the heart of the Seelie Court, built high above a perpetual, blindingly white landscape where the sun never fully set. As they emerged from the gate, the contrast was immediate and overwhelming. The Unseelie contingent, including Corvin and Sienna, wore rich, heavy silks and tailored leathers, midnight black, deep indigo, and blood crimson, that seemed to drink the light. Their skin, pale and luminous in the harsh sunlight, stood out starkly against the overwhelming brightness. The Seelie court, in attendance, was a riot of warmth. The Fae were prettier, often with skin the color of fine bronze, deeply tanned and sun-kissed. Their robes shimmered with golds, oranges, emerald greens, and fiery reds. They wore less armor and more flowing fabric, emphasizing their affinity for heat and light. It felt less like a political assembly, and more like a golden, glittering festival. Yet beneath the gaiety, Sienna felt the tension singing like a plucked wire. The Seelie were arrogant, beautiful, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. The mating games, an ancient tradition dating back to the unification of the Fae, served two purposes. First, it was a symbolic ritual where new, successfully mated pairs from both courts were presented, their power displayed to reinforce the vitality of the Fae realm as a whole. Second, and more importantly, it was a volatile, once-in-a-century political theater, a fragile truce where both courts met on neutral, magically enforced ground to measure each other's strength without bloodshed. Corvin, every inch the glacier, took Sienna's hand, the coldness of their joined palms, a comforting anchor in the heat. "Remember your training, first mate," Corvin murmured, his gaze sweeping the dazzling crowd. "They seek cracks. They seek doubt. Your ice is their natural enemy. Show them only certainty." "I am ready, Corvin," Sienna replied, the words ringing true from her Fae core. She no longer felt like a human girl playing dress-up. She was the High Queen, and this realm, this power, was hers to wield. The King of Sunlight. The air crackled as the Seelie High Lord, King Aurelian, descended the grand gold-inlaid steps of the solar spire. Aurelian was the definition of Seelie majesty, tall, with hair like spun gold and eyes the exact shade of melted amber. His skin was the deepest tan Sienna had yet seen, radiating a subtle, inner heat. He was wearing a simple tunic of pure, snow-white linen, utterly devoid of adornment, making his powerful physique and innate light the focus. He looked every bit the benevolent, sun-drenched ruler. And he was the Fae who had imprisoned Corvin for a millennium. Aurelian stopped 10 feet from Corvin, his smile wide and practiced, though his eyes were sharp and devoid of warmth. "Hi, Lord Corvin." Aurelian's voice was warm, like honeyed wine, the type of voice that promised safety while delivering poison. "A sight for sore eyes indeed. We had mourned your passing, believing you lost to the Veil's decay. What a magnificent surprise to find you restored, and with a new mate at your side. Congratulations are certainly in order." The atmosphere was thicker than cement. All surrounding Fae, both Seelie and unseelie, held their breath, understanding that this first exchange would set the tone for the entire games. Corvin met the gaze evenly, his expression impassive, the silence extending just long enough to be an insult. "King Aurelian," Corvin finally returned, his voice the exact opposite of the Seelie King's, deep, resonant, and cold, like ice cracking in a frozen sea. "Your condolences, while appreciated, were premature. I am not easily dismissed, as you well know. As for my new queen, Sienna has brought to the unseelie court precisely the vitality and power your court has sought to stifle." Aurelian's smile did not waver, but a flicker of true, predatory coldness crossed his eyes. "Stifle? High Lord, you wound me. We seek only balance. The unseelie court requires a strong hand to maintain its primal wild nature, but its expansion must be contained. Your brief absence caused concern for the equilibrium of the Fae world. I heard whispered, there was a much-needed purge in your court. The mate resonance between you and your queen, I am reassured. A human, of all things. I heard the unseelie were very averse to mating with humans, so this pairing is quite unexpected." Sienna stepped slightly forward, the crown heavy and empowering on her brow. "My origins are irrelevant, King Aurelian. I am Fae now, and their High Queen, and my resonance binds me to the High Lord, making his strength mine, and mine his. The question is not where I came from, but how strong I make the unseelie court. And the answer, I assure you, is absolute." She spoke with such calm, crystalline confidence that the Seelie courtiers behind Aurelian exchanged uneasy glances. The mate bond, especially one so powerful, transcended blood purity. It was the ultimate, undeniable source of Fae power. Her words also showed them where their king lacked. Aurelian was yet to find a mate. Aurelian bowed slightly, acknowledging her power grudgingly. "A formidable first mate, then. Welcome, Queen Sienna. May the games prove the strength of our unified realm." "They will certainly prove the strength of mine," Corvin concluded, taking Sienna's elbow and leading her past the king, a deliberate act of perceived disrespect that Aurelian had no choice but to swallow in front of his own court. The display of power. The mating games were not simply races or duels. They were ritualistic displays of control and power, designed to showcase the new Fae generation. Over the next 2 days, the courts mingled uneasily. The unseelie kept to their shadowy pavilion, surrounded by the cool shimmer of Corvin's ambient magic, while the Seelie basked in the open sun, Sienna used the time to observe the king's younger brother, Lord Evander. Evander was remarkably different from Aurelian. His skin was paler, his eyes a gentle, almost meditative gold, and he wore muted, earthy shades of green and brown instead of the blinding gold of his kin. He watched the proceedings with a detached, thoughtful air, often conferring with the older, wisest Seelie lords, those who looked weary of Aurelian's aggressive policy. The culminating event was the Resonance Control Challenge. New Fae, who had recently forged their mate bonds, were required to channel their combined power into a physical construct without letting the output consume them. It was a subtle, highly refined demonstration of magical discipline. Corvin and Sienna, though not obligated to compete, chose to participate as a final, definitive declaration of their bond's power. They stood in the center of a vast, circular field paved with white marble. The task was simple: use the mate resonance to sustain a perfect shimmering dome of their element for one full cycle of the solar clock. A Seelie pair went first. They were beautiful, channeling heat and kinetic energy. Their dome was a dazzling globe of swirling fire, hot and loud. But after only half the cycle, the fire sputtered, and the Seelie Lord lost control, collapsing to the ground exhausted, the fire receding rapidly. Aurelian scowled, hiding his disappointment poorly. Then it was Corvin and Sienna's turn. Corvin did not use the aggressive, blinding sapphire magic he had used during the hunt. Instead, he and Sienna stood motionless, their hands clasped. The mate resonance, that immense, silent force, began to flow. It was internal, controlled, and focused. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a dome began to form around them. It was not violent or loud. It was the color of a winter twilight, a crystalline structure of pure, frozen magic. The exterior was opaque black ice, absorbing the harsh sunlight, while the interior radiated a deep, constant sapphire glow. The temperature in the entire amphitheater dropped immediately, forcing the Seelie Fae to shiver and pull their shimmering robes closer. The unseelie faces took on smiles of smug satisfaction. The dome held, motionless and perfect, for the entire cycle. The Seelie watched in absolute silence. Unlike the Seelie fire, which was spent and volatile, Corvin and Sienna's structure looked like it could hold for an eternity. The display was not of raw force, but of absolute, flawless control, a testament to the perfect equilibrium the bond had created. When the cycle ended, Corvin simply dissipated the dome with a thought. The cool air remained, lingering over the now stunned Seelie court. Sublime control, High Lord Corvin. A truly impressive bond, Aurelian admitted, though his voice was tight with frustrated rage. The unseelie cheered, their pale faces alight with pride. The display had proven, beyond any doubt, that the unseelie power was now ascendant. The unmasking. That evening, a formal banquet was held in the sunken garden, a place where the eternal sunlight was filtered through a canopy of gold leaves, making the air perpetually warm and hazy. The atmosphere was ripe for political maneuver, and Corvin chose this moment to strike. He waited until the celebratory toasts had been offered, until the wine was flowing, and the sense of false comfort was at its peak. He stood slowly, holding up his glass, his dark clothing a sharp contrast against the golden tapestry behind him. A final toast, Corvin announced, his voice carrying easily through the hall. To the mating hunt, that ancient custom which ensures the Fae courts remain strong and vital. It is a tradition that requires great sacrifice and risk, a tradition that ensures the longevity of our entire realm. He looked directly at Aurelian, whose expression was a careful mask of regal benevolence. It is interesting, King Aurelian, Corvin continued, his tone conversational but his eyes glacial, how we speak of these traditions with such reverence, yet how one court risks its blood for them, and the other merely watches. The unseelie court waits for the 3 millennia to pass and the view to open for the mate bond, while the Seelie court brazenly tears through it, risking the balance of all our energies just so to gain a leg up. A murmur rippled through the Seelie ranks. Corvin had publicly called them selfish cowards. High Lord, your assessment is overly simplistic, Aurelian interjected smoothly, leaning forward. The unseelie have long been invited to join in the smaller earth hunts, but shown disdain for it. Yes, we risk the balance of the realm on the surface, but really, seeking mates is for the good and continuity of the realm, therefore we maintain the balance. Corvin gave a chillingly polite smile. Balance. A curious word coming from you, Aurelian. You speak of balance, yet you imprisoned me, the High Lord of the Shadow, for 2 millennia. That was not balance. That was an aggressive, one-sided domination of the Fae world's energy. The shadow was weakened, leaving the light to grow unchecked. He raised his voice, addressing the entire hall now. And what happened when the light grew unchecked? It became a fever. It became arrogance. It became a hunger for total rule. You used the period of my absence to tear tiny rifts in the veil, to grab mates cheaply, avoiding the true difficulty of the hunt, which, ironically, is what made my predecessor weak and left my own court vulnerable to the traitor Valen. There is no balance there, just pure greed. Corvin paused, letting the implication sink in. Aurelian's tyranny was directly responsible for the unseelie coup attempt. The Seelie court is founded on the principle of light, which is order, growth, and fire, Corvin articulated, his voice now taking on the authoritative tone of a scholar citing ancient, unquestionable law. But light must always be checked by shadow, which is control, ice, and discipline. When you removed the shadow, when you imprisoned me, your own court was corrupted by its own excess. Your power became overreaching hunger. He gestured to the vast, open golden hall. Look around you. Where is the subtlety? Where is the reflection? Your realm is too hot, too bright, too much, and you can't even feel it. This uncontrolled growth, this obsession with absolute dominance, is not strength, Aurelian. It is a weakness. Aurelian stood up, his face finally losing its practiced composure, a flash of genuine fury in his amber eyes. You speak of weakness, Corvin, when your court was just purged of 20 traitors? You speak of chaos when you dragged a human from the mortal realm? Your mate is a creature of sentiment, not of steel. My queen, Corvin corrected calmly, his hand resting reassuringly on Sienna's shoulder, who remained perfectly composed beside him. Is steel refined in ice? She has felt the chaotic sentiment of the human world and chosen the absolute certainty of the Fae. The chaos you see in the unseelie is the necessary removal of rot. The chaos you hide in the seelie is structural. It is in your foundation, because your king has allowed the very energy of the realm to become unbalanced. He turned to the silent courtiers. The seelie's power, when unchecked by the shadow, burns too fast. It consumes its own energy. You believe you are growing, but you are merely expending. Your king's ambition will not lead you to conquer the unseelie, Aurelian. It will lead to the complete instability of your own court, and ultimately, to the collapse of the entire Fae realm. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with accusation. Corvin had not just insulted the king, he had used fundamental Fae principles of energy and balance to publicly declare Aurelian a catastrophic failure, a threat to every single Fae in the room. The brothers' intervention, it was Lord Evander who finally broke the tension. He rose from his seat at a secondary table, his movements slow and deliberate, his muted green robes blending into the background, a complete antithesis to his brother's flashiness. My brother speaks with passion, High Lord Corvin, Evander said, his voice calm, rational, and carrying the weight of centuries of wisdom, a truly balanced voice. But your assessment of our fundamental imbalance rings true in the deepest centers of the solar spire. Aurelian whirled on his brother, his face distorted by rage. Evander, silence! You side with the shadow against your own kin? I side with the Fae realm, brother, Evander stated simply. He looked at the surrounding seelie lords, many of whom were nodding slowly, recognizing the dangerous truth in Corvin's words. I, and many of the oldest houses, watched as your ambition grew unchecked, Aurelian. We saw the true light, the need for sustained, careful growth, perverted into a hunger for absolute dominance over the veil. Your actions led to the imprisonment of the Shadow's High Lord, and invited the very destabilization that Corvin speaks of. Evander stepped forward, his eyes fixing on the golden shimmer of the throne Aurelian had just vacated. The balance of the realm is not merely political, it is energetic. When the light seeks to destroy the shadow, the light itself becomes corrupted. We have spent the last millennium in this corrupted state, chasing expansion and dominance, and in doing so, we have made ourselves vulnerable to the instability of the mortal realm. You can see it in the weak resonance of the mated seelie couples. He looked back at Corvin and offered a respectful yet careful bow. High Lord Corvin is correct. Your unchecked hunger for power, brother, is now the greatest weakness of the seelie court. The time has come for the necessary rebalancing of the light. Suddenly, the air was thick with magic. Not the icy, sapphire magic of Corvin, but a powerful, warm golden magic that was controlled and contained. This was the true power of the seelie elders, not the flashy fire of Aurelian. A dozen senior seelie lords rose as one, each one an ancient power, standing silently behind Evander. They were not rising to fight, they were rising to validate the energy shift. Aurelian realized too late that the purge Corvin had performed on the unseelie had shown the seelie elders exactly what had to be done in their own court. The fear of Corvin was less potent than the logic of Corvin. Treason! Aurelian roared, his own uncontrolled magic flaring brightly, making the golden leaves above them smoke. Necessary correction, brother, Evander countered calmly. He extended his hand, and the ancient seelie symbol of judgment, a pure, radiating sphere of gold light, appeared in his palm. You are relieved of the crown, King Aurelian. For the stability of the realm, you must step down. Aurelian, faced with the unified, focused power of his own ancient houses, knew he was beaten. He had focused so much on dominating the Unseelie that he had forgotten to watch his own flank. His magic, too wild and aggressive, could not defeat the combined, disciplined power of his brother and the elders. With a final, furious snarl of defeat, Aurelian threw his empty glass to the floor and was immediately seized and removed by the silent, powerful guards loyal to the older lords. The coup was swift, bloodless, and absolute. Lord Evander, with a deep breath, faced the assembled Fae. The mating games are concluded. The time for rebuilding balance has begun. The Seelie court will no longer seek to dominate or compromise the ancient line of the shadow. We seek only peace and the necessary balance of our shared Fae realm. The pact and the return. The final morning was spent in the great council chambers, the air now noticeably cooler and less oppressive under the rule of the new king, Evander. The sunken garden had been replaced with the simple, balanced architecture of the main hall, a sign that the new regime valued substance over spectacle. Corvin and Sienna sat across a massive table carved from ancient wood, facing King Evander. The Unseelie generals Iris and Jax, and the new Unseelie lord of the Ethel, Arion, stood behind them. Evander pushed a heavy, rolled parchment across the table, a treaty hammered out over the previous night. This document, High Lord Corvin, formally ends the state of passive aggression between our courts and guarantees the safety of all Unseelie within Seelie borders, Evander explained, his tone measured. It ensures that the Vale will remain untouched by any Seelie mages, and that all future mating hunts will be conducted with transparency and respect for the Unseelie's territory. Corvin scanned the document, not with his eyes but with his Fae core, tasting the magic infused in the parchment. It was genuine. Evander sought true equilibrium, understanding that the destruction of the shadow would ultimately mean the destruction of the light. The terms are satisfactory, King Evander, Corvin stated, his voice now softened, devoid of its accusatory edge. The Unseelie court will honor this pact and will, in return, refrain from any incursions into Seelie territory. We desire stability, not conquest. He pulled a massive iron stylus from his belt, a weapon in itself, and signed the document with a flourish of sapphire magic that instantly froze the ink into permanent crystalline script. Sienna signed below him, her name written in the same indelible ice script. Evander smiled faintly, a hint of genuine relief in his golden eyes. He signed last, his magic a warm, controlled glow. May this pact last until the twin moons cease their passage, High Lord, High Queen. It will last as long as the balance holds, King Evander, Corvin replied, standing. He and Sienna gave a formal, equal bow, not subservient, but respectful. The business was done. As they moved back to the private gateway, the immense weight of the last 3 days began to lift. The tension was gone, replaced by the profound, exhausted satisfaction of total victory, not just of power, but of political and energetic dominance. Waiting by the gate, Sienna looked back at the solar spire, which now felt less like an aggressive furnace, and more like a necessary beacon. You saved the Unseelie court, Sienna whispered, her gaze fixed on Corvin's profile. I saved the Fae realm, first mate, Corvin corrected, pulling her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. Unchecked light and unchecked shadow both lead to the same ruin. My imprisonment taught me that the threat was not merely external. It was systemic. You gave me the power to achieve the balance necessary for survival. What do you think happened to Aurelian? Sienna asked. Corvin gave her a small smile. He was stripped of his power. When a Fae king is deposed, his high lords can be able to strip him of his magic, taking away his ability to claim the throne once more. Sienna shivered at the words. Corvin pressed his forehead to hers, and she felt the cool, deep thrum of his content. He was not satisfied with just vengeance. He was satisfied with order. His desire for her, which had been born of desperation, was now settled into a deep, cold, perfect certainty. We have a kingdom to govern, Queen Sienna, Corvin murmured against her ear. And now, we can do it without constantly watching the sunlight for treachery. He led her through the massive, shimmering gateway. The bright, relentless gold of the solar spire vanished, replaced by the familiar, comforting, crystalline twilight of the Citadel of Shadows. The air instantly cooled, wrapping around them like a protective sheet of velvet. The journey was over, the threat neutralized, and the balance restored. Together, the High Lord and the High Queen of the Unseelie court walked back toward their ice-bound throne, the future of the entire Fae realm secured in the chilling perfection of their combined power.